Hi everybody, my name is Bridget with two T's and an E at the end, and I'm not from Guilty Dear. And today I was wanting to make a video about how I personally like to deal with transphobia, whether it be like online, in person, whatever. I mean, I don't really know what other thing there is. And I just want to preface everything I'm about to say in this video with the fact that this is what personally works for me. I do not know if this is medically sound information or, if this is going to be a good way for most people. This is just what works for me. And I'm a little bit of a weirdo. So just take everything I say with like a whole couple spoonfuls of salt just in case, because again, this is based off my experiences and what works for me may not work for you. But anyway, with that all said and done, let's get into the video. I'm gonna try not to make it too long. See you on the other side. So having been officially trans for about 3 years by this point and being queer just in general for 7, having found myself being bisexual at 16, I've kind of been around the block for a while and have been experiencing a lot of types of just transphobia or, biphobia or whatever for a long time. And I definitely can say that a lot of this has gotten easier with time for sure. I think maybe time doesn't heal all wounds, but it definitely helps. It does help. So just one thing is really just going to be taking everything a day at a time and letting it happen. And you will just become more resilient over time. But these tips are more designed to try working on stuff and trying like a head start into preparing before anything happens, or, if something is currently ongoing, being able to have some sort of way to fight against that. So the first thing I want to preface before literally going into any of this is having a sense of community and a sort of support group with you. I don't think this has to be in person, although it probably does benefit from it just because of having that type of contact. But there are various reasons why people cannot have that sort of connection in person. Whether you're in a place where you need a car to go places and you don't have a car or a license or person to take you, whatever it might be. Maybe your schedule is too packed and you can't fit it. Maybe you live in a place that's unfortunately really, really badly transphobic and there's not really options for going to a queer support group in your city or town or whatever because it's not okay there whatsoever. So it doesn't have to be in person, although I would recommend it if available, but it's okay if it isn't. I will admit that most of my support group is online, and that definitely has its own benefits. But anyway, regardless, establishing some sense of having a community and some sense of friends who are like-minded is, in my opinion, the single-handed most important thing that you can do for yourself. Even if we take apart the whole thing about being trans and transphobia in the world and whatever, as humans, we're just extremely social creatures to begin with. So having other people to just spend time with and get validation from and be like, I love you, is extremely, extremely important. So, regardless, even if you're like a cis person watching this and, you're struggling with your own issues, definitely just making friends and having some sort of sense of community is extremely important. And I mean, this is kind of something that I really take for granted nowadays. As I kind of mentioned in my 1K sub special, I talked about just how important my friends were for me during my transition and the steps leading up to actually transitioning in the first place. And I think it's extremely important to have people there for you, even if you really are not able to be there for yourself just yet. It's kind of like that old proverb that they say, a shared joy is twice a joy, and a shared sorrow is half a sorrow. I think that's absolutely true. Maybe not in all cases, but in most. And I just really cannot recommend community enough. So now after that whole rant about how awesome support groups are and how great community is, you might be asking yourself, Bridget, where am I supposed to find community? And for that, I would recommend, finding like volunteering places near you that would probably have some sort of queer presence. Oftentimes you can find like a lot of like volunteering groups associated with political parties. And while I don't think necessarily that like it's like a squares and circles situation, you know what I mean? Like, I feel like basically all queer people are going to be some sort of left-leaning, like, assuming this is like through like my US politics view. You know, most queer people, I would hope, are going to be left-leaning, but not all people who are left-leaning are queer, you know what I mean? So, you know, going to a volunteering organization, which is sort of associated along that sort of line, or just is like sponsored by it or whatever, is definitely a really good idea to just meet some super cool people there, and can also just give you some really fulfilling like work out there and just make you feel good about yourself. You know, helping people out or helping things out, if it's like animals, just, it's great. Another thing, as I mentioned earlier, is trying to find like any support groups in your town or city or whatever it might be. It may be harder depending on where you're at, but there are a lot of places everywhere, whether that's like in your high school, in your college, even if you're a full-blown adult and whatever, and you're just trying to find something like that, you could absolutely do it. I'm a little bit of a scaredy cat, admittedly, and I don't really go out to bars very much, but I have heard that a lot of cool people can be met there too, but definitely be careful if you do go to a bar. There's a whole list of things that you want to be careful there, so maybe avoid that one. And I've also heard that for people who are into card games, like Magic the Gathering, for example, apparently a lot of game stores have tournaments for that sort of stuff, and there are a lot of other trans people who attend that sort of thing. So that's also a super good idea. And that's what I mostly recommend for in-person things, you know, anywhere along those sort of lines, like coffee shops or whatever. But for online spaces, you have a lot of extra areas that you could go to. I know that for gamers like myself, there's a lot of specific games that may fit you really well. Like, I play the game Tower Unite a lot, and that has a massive queer population, and is partially how I have like a quarter of my very large friend pool, just meeting cool people on there and talking to them. I know there's a lot of other places like VR Chat that also has a very high queer population. You know, I know like a lot of indie game places like Hollow Knight or Rain World also happen to have massive queer groups. Anything like that sounds like a good idea. But you could also have it be a bit more low-key and join Discord servers that aren't exactly as popular. If you're not really much into games and you just prefer talking to people, I think that's also a super good idea. And if you're going to join servers, I'd probably recommend a more low-key small server. At least that's what I personally like to do, because it's a lot more easy to go ignored or unnoticed in like a 5,000 plus member server. But that's just my personal advice. You know, my experiences could be completely isolated incidents, and I might be wrong in that. But regardless, trying to find places like this and just meeting other really cool people who are like-minded is a really good idea. I know I've been ironing this point out for ages, but lastly, I just want to say that like servers for bands or whatever that are queer, like Last Beach is my favorite band, or was my favorite band. They also have a Discord server, and that's another really great place to look. Or, you know, you have my YouTube server for Nigel, like my cat, that also has a lot of trans people, so feel free to join that if you want to. But anyway, moving on, because I think that's the most important point, so I'll try to just get that out of the way, and we'll move on to everything else, which will take a lot shorter, thankfully. So, moving on to the other points I wanted to get out of the way. Firstly, I think just limiting your exposure to transphobia in the first place is going to be another massively affecting way to deal with it. I definitely understand the feeling of not wanting to really disconnect from the internet too much, especially if you are a queer person and most of your friends or whatever happen to be on the internet. And like a lot of the communication you get really comes from there. So I don't mean to tell you not to really use the internet very much, but I do want you to curate it and think about the places that you're visiting and the time that you're spending. I used to have a pretty bad social media problem myself, and I would spend way too long like scrolling on like Reddit or whatever. So what I began doing is just apps that I find myself mindlessly going to or whatever. I put like a strict like 15 or 20 minute timer on for the day. So I'm not entirely missing out on like meme culture or, you know, the latest news or whatever. I still get like 15 to 20 minutes of scrolling, But that's all I get for the day. I still get to be involved in that sort of thing, and I still have like things to send my friends and whatever, and I'm not really like left out, but I ignore so much of the hopeless just post after post, seeing all these awful things happening all the time. It just is eliminated very much. And in that downtime, I find myself spending time doing other things, like writing poetry or playing video games, exercising, hanging out with my girlfriend, really whatever. In addition to that, you could also just kind of curate, as I said earlier, the places that you frequent, spending less time on negative posts or, you know, getting out of communities that are becoming more negative. You know, something I personally have found to be pretty helpful for my health is, like, as I said earlier, I use Reddit. I've been unsubscribing from a lot of trans communities, not because I don't want to be involved in that sort of thing anymore, but there's just a lot of really depressing information going on constantly, and there's a very fine line between being informed on an issue and having it beaten into your head repeatedly until, like, your skull cracks. And it can be a bit difficult, despite these very drastic differences, to really find that fine line. But I find myself more often than not visiting these communities feeling so much worse than I previously did before. So I instead opt to get that sort of communication out through other positive channels on YouTube, or trying to find other people who are like my friends and just get to have more nice conversations and stuff with them, because it can be really hard to just see so much doom and gloom constantly 24/7. And all of these previous tips about eliminating these sources of negativity from your life really don't apply to just transphobia or just trans issues. It could really be any type of predicament that you're in. You know, if you're in a situation with a person who constantly brings you down or makes you feel stupid or whatever, you're not obligated to be friends with this person or talk to this person or go to that community, organization, and whatever it might be. Regardless of their connection to you, regardless of how long they've known you, you're not forced to do this, and you're not a bad person for not wanting to spend time in places or with people who made you feel so bad. And that sort of transitions, see what I did there? To our next topic of, I don't want to say cutting out people who made you feel this way, but definitely establishing healthy boundaries with people or groups that are causing a lot of distress to you. I've personally been very fortunate in my transition to have not really had too many relationships with like friends change, but I've definitely had a few, and I know a lot of other people who have lost entire friend groups, and it can be really, really difficult and scary plunging into this sort of thing, just not having that type of support and losing these friends. But it's not worth being around a person who is unwilling to change and try to be better for you. Though I know I've been pretty fortunate in not losing very many friends, I've definitely had to try to be patient with people and give them time to adjust and everything. But after a certain point, you give people so much leeway and so much time and patience that you need to be there for yourself. And if someone genuinely does not seem like they're going to change for you or even try to be there for you and make you feel comfortable in your identity, do not let these people guilt trip you into being friends or anything. You deserve people as lovely as yourself who are going to bring you up and not keep you down or make you feel bad. And this absolutely applies for family too. I know it's not really easy to do that in a lot of cases, especially if you live with family, but there's definitely been times where with close family or extended family, I've just given far less attention because I was not being treated respectfully after a very long time. And, you know, eventually people pick up on that and they look inwards oftentimes and are like, wow, like, you know, I kind of see why this person does not want to spend time with me. I should be better. And unfortunately, sometimes they don't, but you just need to act in your best interest and Do what is going to be good for you. Your personal pursuit of happiness in your transition is not an attack on anybody or their freedom or anything. You are simply just trying to be yourself. You are not destroying connections or anything like stupid like that. You're allowed to be happy, and you're allowed to seek out your own sense of validation and internal comfort. So after kind of restructuring like friends or whatever, or the sort of like groups that you find yourself hanging out in, and whether that's a good or bad influence for you, I would definitely put this nuts thing up there with, pair it together with the whole community aspect. And that's just going to be finding an internal sense of validation. As I said earlier, we're extremely social creatures, and I think having external validation and having people to be like, hey, I enjoy hanging out with you, and I want to play games with you, or I like doing things with you. That's awesome. And it's extremely useful and amazing to have people like that. But it's definitely not enough to have your only sense of self be what other people think of you. And that's why I very much suggest having an internal sense of validation. And you're gonna have to go about accomplishing this in a very different way depending on who you are. For me personally, I found a massive sense of confidence and a boost to my own validation through gaining the ability to pass, with so much work going into my voice to make it the way it sounds and feels today, and putting a lot of effort into my appearance and whatever to feel pretty and just be seen the way I want to be seen. But what works for me is not going to work for you, or maybe it will, but what I mean to say is everybody has their own type of goals and things that they're trying to pursue, and that's going to be the most integral thing for you with gaining your own sense of validation. For you personally, maybe it is learning some really cool makeup. Or maybe it's even just making friends and knowing that you're able to be loved. Maybe it's going on some super awesome project and finishing it and being like, wow, look at this awesome thing I made. Whatever gets you this. Sorry, Nigel had a hairball. Whatever is going to give you that sort of internal just sense of knowing who you are deep down and not letting what other people say phase you nearly as much is going to be extremely important for you. When you gain that sort of sense of confidence in yourself and you know who you are, all these people who say I'm hideous or I'm an abomination or tell me to kill myself repeatedly, or like that one guy who on my 1K special came back over the course of 8 days to leave like 5 different hate comments. I mean, that was more funny, to be honest, than anything. When you have a lot more of your own sense of confidence, it's so much more easy to look at these people and just shrug it off and be like, screw that. Like, I know who I am. I believe that I'm a good person. I do things for the right reasons, and I'm not so reliant on how all these other people think of me, or my view of myself is so much less affected now by other people saying bad things about me, because I know who I am. And I suggest just working on that for yourself through whichever means are going to accomplish it, because it is just such a freeing feeling being able to have that sort of knowledge of who you are. And lastly, this is probably going to be the final thing I mentioned on this sort of topic, but it's a bit more of an extension of the last point. And this is where I'd say the tips get very much into the territory of this is probably just a weird Bridget idiosyncrasy that is not helpful to anybody else in the world except for me. But I'm gonna say it anyways because I find it funny and I like to do it anyways. So on the topic of having your own sense of validation, once you really do accomplish it, I find it fun to kind of poke and just like tease at like remarks about the things that people say about you or whatever. Like, you'll probably notice that for a person who says they don't care about hate comments on the channel, I do bring them up a lot. And it's not really because they upset me, but I just find them funny. Like, I enjoy acting like I'm exactly what this person is saying. It's just funny for me, and it kind of helps personally further just exaggerate how stupid of a claim this is. Like that one person who commented like, "Don't forget, this abomination is disgusting and is gay." And it's like, okay, first, like, that's true, but but it's also just funny for me because I'm just like, I'll casually just drop in a conversation like, "Oh, don't forget guys, this abomination here, disgusting and gay. Don't forget it." Or, you know, like if I accidentally like burp or something and I'm like eating and someone's like, "That's not very ladylike," I'll be like, "Oh, of course. Why would I have done that? Like, I'm not feminine whatsoever. What do you mean?" It's just fun to exaggerate all these stupid things and kind of poke fun at it to truly hammer in how stupid of a perspective it is. Or like, you know, a lot of the time I'll get called like a man or whatever, or, "Oh, you know, I'm just a man in a dress." Firstly, I'll have you know I'm a man in a skirt right now. But I also just like to just joke about how like me and Sylvie, my girlfriend, will do this all the time with each other. Like we'll just go up to each other and just be like, "Hey, what's up, hubby? Like, you're looking very masculine today, my beautiful man, boyfriend." And just be so stupid with it. And eventually it just becomes sort of in a way desensitized and just does not make you feel anything anymore. I've also done this a lot to myself with like my dead name, Joshua, for example. I'm open about it just because I feel like, and again, this is approaching territory of just a weird Bridget thing that probably doesn't work for other people, but I still wanted to mention it. For me, I find it freeing to not be worried about people finding out what my dead name is, or, you know, not be afraid of like, "Oh, what if somebody like finds it and starts saying it and everyone else learns it?" It's a lot more freeing for me to just say it and let people have their fun with it, because I have memed it and parodied it to death within myself so often that it's just funny to me. Like, there are certain people, like, for the most part, people who knew me before I transitioned, that if they call me Josh or whatever, I'm not gonna lie, it does still upset me. But if it's like a person who's like a stranger or whatever, and they find it out, and they're just like trying to make me uncomfortable and dead name me or whatever, I just find it more funny than anything. And I like having that sort of, hi Nigel, I like having that sort of freedom of just not being able to have anything put above my head and have me worried or whatever, because I know who I am, you know? I'm Bridget with 2 T's and an E at the end. And I'm not from Guilty Gear. So again, that final tip, probably wouldn't recommend it nearly as universally as everything else I said in this video, but I figured I'll mention it just because, you know, why not? It's something I like to do. And, you know, there's a small chance that maybe you guys will find benefit from it too. You know, more often than not, when I take a look back and, you know, I stop the parodying and whatever, and I just have a moment to sort of think about the situation, more often than not, I'm honestly more sad for the people who say a lot of these things to me than I'm truly upset at anything. Just because I know that a lot of these people say it from a place of having a lot of extreme self-hatred, or having so many issues in their own life that it's difficult for them to live on, and they just need to take their frustration out on something, and they do it through unfair and, you know, awful means of trying to put other people down. So it kind of just hurts to see, more than anything, people doing this sort of thing to themselves, or to me rather, but, you know, a person who bullies another person is not justified whatsoever, but they most definitely have a reason behind why they're doing it. And it just upsets me to know that so many people are struggling internally with, you know, whether it's like the confines of gender stereotypes and whatever, and like, "Oh, women don't do this," and "You're not girly if you do that," or whether it's a more systematic issue like transphobia. Well, actually, both of these are systematic, but you understand what I'm trying to say. So, like, a storm sort of aside, and now the room is like super dark, so sorry about that. But anyway, that's really all I wanted to say in this video, I think. I feel like I got everything out that I wanted to, and I kind of had to think about this video for a while and really think about the outline I made for my video, because I did not want to make anyone's, dysphoria feel worse, and I tried as much to not really bring up specific examples of transphobia or ways that people may be shitty towards you, because I still want this to be more informational than like, here's what you say if someone calls you this. And it's like, oh, now I'm self-conscious about this thing I didn't know I was self-conscious about. But I really hope that you guys enjoyed it. I really hope that you got some usage out of it and feel like it was a helpful video to you. That's really all I want to do with this video. Yeah. So if you enjoyed the video, a comment is always appreciated. They always make my day and just make me so happy anytime I receive them. But if you don't want to comment, like is also super cool. If you did not like the video, feel more than free to dislike it. And that's kind of all I have to say. I do want to announce real quick that I now have channel memberships. It's just gonna have like a few like extra perks, like priority reply to comments and whatever. But for the most part, the perks are not really going to be anything that you're going to care about. It's really just if you have a lot of extra money lying around and you want to support me. But I do not need this money. Do not get it if you're not financially stable. I just like money. So just make sure you take care of yourself first and do not worry about me in the slightest. I'll put up a forum soon for the next trans euphoria submissions, and feel free to reply to that and just submit your own, and that's probably going to be the topic of the next video. I'll see you guys then, and I hope you have a lovely day until then. Bye!